Emily, you and I, have spoken. We know we talk about family values. We talk and getting that communication going. How have you seen working with Karen and the history? Why become so important in pulling out the values from the past for shaping the values today?
Yeah, it's I mentioned the cards. Those have been hugely helpful to open things up. And then Karen will come into a meeting having been, it's part of the engagement that she's been given permission to do this research about the family. And she'll come and she'll bring, we'll be preparing in advance, and we'll know like which aspects of the history we really want to highlight with them in the family meeting. And then I help facilitate the conversations. She brings all of this amazing content, and then especially if there's some painful things from the past, it's like, okay, well, how do we really want to look at this and hone this for the future? What is this really pointing to in terms of our current values, and what were our family's values before that we want to bring forward, and that we also want to maybe say we're done with those, like where they get a chance to be a choice about it. And it's the facilitation of those conversations that creates this really rich environment. And a lot of times we work with very busy, very successful people, and when they take the time to set aside to have their meetings, and we're doing more virtual now, we give a lot of spaciousness to these conversations, and we set it up in advance that this isn't going to be a quick down and dirty, like, okay, here's the facts, okay, next. It's like, no, we're going to really unpack this, and we're going to see what's there, and we're going to see what's even beneath that, and giving everybody a lot of space and everybody who's there a chance to be able to talk about it. The youngest to the oldest, and we always invite in-laws. We like having, whenever possible, that they can be included as well, because they have such great perspective taking as well to add to it. And then there's ways to really bring it alive. If I could give an example of one family where
I would love an example. Yeah.
The rising gen started to get really curious about how the money was made and how they ended up owning all of these different kind of more passive income properties. And there's a fascinating history and story to it that luckily the patriarch was still alive, and he told this whole story, and they loved hearing the story, and we got lots of data around it. But they wanted to know these places because the family was benefiting from storage units and gas stations in 3 different states. And they decided to do a massive family bus tour. And the rising gen got the video equipment. They got trained in how to do some video historical interviewing. And they captured so many amazing stories because he was a real creative fellow. And so every time they would go to a place, he'd say, oh yeah, I remember when we got this one. And he'd tell all these different stories about what happened and where they were, and which kid was just born or what. And it just created this huge wealth of information for the family that they never had. And it ended up being a huge gift to everybody because he ended up dying in a plane crash a few years later. He was a private plane pilot, and they never would have had any of that if they hadn't done that. And I really love telling that story because it's like, no, don't put it off. Don't wait for it. Right. Like you have the means, like really make the things happen for yourselves. And if you can't do it physically right now because of COVID or whatever might be happening, you can do virtual travel in amazing ways. But yeah, don't wait. That's the biggest thing. And there's a huge benefit to the family to really learn what was happening at those times, hear it directly from him, and then look at, wow, what do we want to do in the future? And are these things that we're going to want to sell off, or do we want to keep them in perpetuity? And really have those conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying. And it just, something popped into my head. I'll share. This doesn't necessarily, we serve families of means because they have the means to pay us. And so, but these conversations, even for a family that, doesn't have substantial wealth, they're really powerful conversations. And, my family's done all right. And I'm sitting there talking with my father-in-law, who's now in his 80s, mid 80s. And we were talking about when, his businesses that he ran and some of the stories that, you know, that came to light through my questioning of him. And it was just out of pure, because I get curious about this stuff, and, you know, having been around it for so long. And my wife overheard me talking to him and said, "You learned things about our family that I didn't even know." And I didn't realize, you know, some of the things that he did and how neat it was that, you know, he ended up where he ended up, because he was, you know, I would say he was a scrapper. He was not the greatest in school. He was not, you know, not going to be, you know, the doctor or the lawyer or whatnot, which a lot of his family members were. But he was an entrepreneur, and he just scrapped his way through, and then an opportunity came up, and he was friendly. He was super friendly, and everybody loved him. And so that, you know, opportunities presented themselves to him that maybe other people wouldn't have gotten because of his likability. And he ended up, you know, building a incredible restaurant. And somebody came in and said, "I want to have what you have." And they bought his restaurant at such a premium. It was ridiculous amounts back in the early 80s, right before the stock market boom. So he took that money, parlayed it in the stock market. And it's just really interesting to see how it all came together. And as a side note, nobody ever ran that restaurant again. It, like 3 or 4 owners came in afterwards, but it was him. It was that likability and him going to the tables that people were in the restaurant for. It wasn't the food and everything else, even though he had great food. But it's interesting. Family history, it matters to all of us.
Absolutely. And so a couple of things come to mind with that. The last point that you made about how the restaurant, it never experienced the same kind of success again. I find that it's
Karen,
not.
can I stop you for just a second?
Yeah.
Your internet froze for a second. If you go back, you said, you know, the last part that we heard was he was the last one successful in the restaurant.
Yeah. So often it is not really the product that is important to the business. You know, not even necessarily the location. It's the culture, and it's the culture that comes down from the leadership, and it's the culture, you know, how the leader treats the employees and the staff and the opportunities created. So again, you know, capturing that so that it can be replicated some way or another has been one of the motivators for some of our clients to say, you know, we really need to explore this. And another thing, yeah, go on.
No, it's so neat that you're saying this stuff. And I just want to pound in that you know how important this is. We are sitting at restaurants sometimes today, and somebody will come up to my wife and say, "Are you Rich LaBar's daughter?" "Yeah, that's me." He goes, "Oh, I worked for your dad for summers for many, many years." And that culture piece, so understanding that and being able to weave that into the future is really important. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, absolutely.